All right, folks, get ready, because today we're going deep on something pretty fascinating legally, but also this is a topic that you are going to see on your UPSC mains exam, judicial accountability in India.
Yeah. It's really the core of any democracy.
That's right. We're talking about the system of checks and balances that make sure that even the highest courts are answerable for what they do.
And India, with its history and political landscape, it's got a really unique system trying to find that balance,
Yeah.
keeping the judiciary independent, but also making sure that no one's abusing their power.
Exactly. And for all our listeners out there who are prepping for the UPSC, this deep dive, think of it like your secret weapon. We're going to unpack those dense constitutional articles. We'll analyze real-world case studies. You'll even come away with some analytical frameworks that you can use to just nail those essay questions.
And what's really interesting about this topic from a UPSC perspective is how it ties into so many different themes. Constitutional law, governance, ethics, current affairs. I mean, it's multidimensional. It really tests if you can connect the dots.
Okay, so let's get into it. We've got a bunch of articles and landmark judgments here, but don't worry, this isn't going to be some boring law school lecture.
No, we'll break it down in a way that's easy to understand, but that also, gets you thinking analytically. That's what the mains exam is all about.
All right, let's start with the foundation. Articles 124 and 124 of the Indian Constitution. These, along with Articles 217 and 218, really lay out the framework for removing judges from office. I'm sure you've memorized them, but let's really dive into what they mean.
Right. They set the grounds for removal, right? Proved misbehavior or incapacity. And this is where it gets interesting, especially for UPSC aspirants. Think about the specific words they chose. Proved. It's not enough to just say someone did something wrong. You have to have evidence. There has to be an investigation. And the bar for actually removing a judge is really high.
And that's where the Judges Inquiry Act of 1968 comes in, right?
Exactly. That act is like your roadmap. It shows you how judicial accountability works, practically. It tells you everything. Who can start an inquiry, what the investigation looks like, how a judge can be removed. This is really important to know for the UPSC because it shows you understand the legal mechanisms.
So let's say someone's listening and they're like, okay, how do you actually remove a judge? You can't just fire them.
Right. It's called impeachment. It's pretty complex. Both houses of parliament are involved, Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. First, someone has to present a motion in one of the houses. If the speaker or the chairperson admits it, well, then things really get going.
Now, this is interesting. Why do you think the Constitution makes it so hard to remove a judge? I bet you'll see this kind of question on your mains exam, so think critically here.
It's a great point. It's not just about the procedure. It's about balancing different, competing ideas. On the one hand, you have accountability. No one's above the law, not even judges. But then there's the idea of judicial independence, which is super important.
Meaning judges need to be free to decide things based on the law and what they believe is right, without worrying about someone coming after them politically.
Exactly. Imagine if a judge could be removed just because they made a decision someone didn't like. They wouldn't be able to uphold the Constitution. They wouldn't be able to protect individual rights.
So that really high bar for removal, needing a two-thirds majority vote in both houses, it's there to protect judicial independence.
You got it. But this creates a tough situation. Because while we want to protect judges from outside pressure, does this also make it too hard to hold them accountable if they genuinely mess up? This tension, trying to find that balance, it's at the heart of all the debates about judicial accountability in India. It's something you'll want to think about when you're writing your answers for UPSC.
Okay, so we've covered the basics. Now let's look at how this actually plays out.
Case studies. And remember, these aren't just stories. These are chances to see how these principles are actually used and argued about in real life. The UPSC loves real-world examples, so pay close attention.
Okay, first up, Justice V. Ramaswamy, a Supreme Court judge accused of financial, impropriety.
Yeah.
Back in the 90s. What were the accusations?
People were saying he was spending way too much on his official residence, renovations, furniture, things like that. There were also allegations he misused public funds, like he went way over his budget. Keep in mind, back then, things weren't as transparent. There wasn't as much public scrutiny as we see today.
Did they investigate?
They formed a committee following the Judicial Inquiry Act. And this is where it gets interesting, and this is gold for your UPSC prep. The committee said he was guilty. Think about it. A Supreme Court judge found guilty of doing something wrong. This had never happened before.
Wow, that's huge. So they removed him, right?
Not so fast. This is where the impeachment process gets a bit messy. The motion to remove him, it failed in the Lok Sabha.
Wait, He was guilty but not removed?
No. This is where politics and the law kind of crash. Even though the committee said he was guilty, a lot of people in the ruling party at the time abstained from the vote. So the motion didn't get the two-thirds majority it needed. It was a huge controversy. It really showed how politics can influence the outcome, even when someone's been proven to have done something wrong.
So he just kept serving on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, finished his term and then retired. Now, imagine you're answering a UPSC question about this. You wouldn't just tell the story. You'd analyze it, you know? What does this tell us about how impeachment works? The good and the bad. How does it show that tension between holding judges accountable and keeping things free from political influence? That's the kind of analysis that gets you the marks.
Yeah, you're right. It's not just about the facts. It's about understanding the details, the different opinions, the big picture stuff. That's how you stand out as a UPSC candidate.
Exactly. And this is just one case. There are others that show different sides of this issue. Ready for another deep dive?
Let's do it. I think our listeners are ready for more.
Okay, let's talk about Justice Sumitra Sen of the Calcutta High Court.
Okay, Justice Sumitra Sen, hit me with it. What was he accused of?
This one was about misappropriation of funds, a lot of money, that he was supposed to be managing as a court-appointed receiver. So another case of alleged financial wrongdoing. But this one, it didn't go quite like the Ramaswamy case.
Oh, really? How so? Did they use the Judges Inquiry Act this time, too?
Yeah, they set up a 3-member committee to look into it, and guess what? Guilty again.
Wow, so that's 2 cases where a judge was found guilty of serious misconduct. What happened then? Did they impeach him?
Well, the Rajya Sabha, that was the house that started the process. They did vote to remove him, yeah.
So he was out, right? Removed from office.
Hold on, not quite. This is where it gets interesting, and it's an important point for your UPSC prep. Justice Sanan, he resigned before the Lok Sabha could even vote.
Wait a minute. So even though the committee found him guilty and the Rajya Sabha was about to kick him out, he just quit and that was it?
Yep, exactly. And this is a big problem in the system, something you could definitely write about in your mains exam. Resignation, in this situation, it lets a judge basically dodge the whole impeachment process. They get to avoid a final verdict from Parliament.
That doesn't seem right, does it? I mean, it makes you wonder how effective the system really is.
Yeah, it's a serious issue. And it's not just this case. It happens a lot. Legal experts, people who want to change the system, they've been talking about this for years.
Can you give us another example? I'm starting to see a pattern here.
Let's talk about Justice P.D. Dinakuran. He was a high court judge with a whole bunch of allegations against him. Land grabbing, misconduct, all kinds of serious stuff.
Okay, so pretty bad. What happened to him?
They formed a committee, the usual thing, under the Judges Inquiry Act. But here's the thing. Justice Dinakuran, he resigned the very day the committee was supposed to start investigating.
So he saw what was coming and bailed before they could get him, huh?
You could say that. And that's a perfect example of how the system, even with all this talk about proved misbehavior, sometimes it just doesn't hold people accountable.
Okay, 3 different judges, 3 cases of serious wrongdoing. They all just quit and avoided the whole thing. So what can we do about it?
That's the big question. And it's a really important one for your UPSC prep, too. Everyone agrees that things need to change. But finding the right solutions, that's tricky. There are a lot of opinions on that.
Well, I'm ready to hear some ideas. What kind of reforms are people suggesting?
One of the biggest ones is to make sure investigations continue even if the judge resigns.
Makes sense to me. How would that work?
It would require a change in the law, in the whole way we think about this. It can't just be about removing a judge from their position. It has to be about finding out if they're guilty, whether they're still a judge or not.
So even if they resign, the investigation keeps going until there's a conclusion.
Yeah.
That way, they can't just use resignation as a way to escape.
Right. And it might make other judges think twice before trying the same trick.
But wouldn't that make people less likely to want to be judges? Who wants to deal with a long, messy investigation even after they've quit?
That's a good point, and some people do argue against this reform because of that. But those who support it say that accountability is more important. They think that if judges can just resign and avoid scrutiny, people will lose trust in the whole system, and that's a lot worse in the long run.
I see their point. What else have people suggested?
Another big idea is to have a more independent body for investigating these cases. Right now, there are too many layers of approval, and politics can get in the way.
So we need a group that's not influenced by politics.
Mm.
They would focus on the evidence and make sure everything's fair, right?
Exactly. You could have legal experts, former judges, people everyone knows are honest and impartial. They could start investigating without waiting for Parliament to give them the okay. That would make things a lot faster and more efficient.
Sounds promising. But even with a better investigative body, wouldn't Parliament still have the final say on impeachment?
Yeah, they probably would. But a more independent investigation would give Parliament much better information. It would be harder for them to ignore serious allegations just for political reasons.
So the whole process needs to be stronger, from the investigation to the impeachment, to make sure there's real accountability. What else needs to change?
Well, the Judges Inquiry Act itself, a lot of people say it's outdated and causes delays. The impeachment process can drag on for years, and that doesn't look good. It gives the impression that justice is being delayed, maybe even denied.
I get it.
Yeah.
Those delays damage public trust, and they create a lot of uncertainty for the judiciary.
Exactly. So the act needs to be updated. Streamline the process, set clear deadlines, get rid of the roadblocks. This is something you'll want to know about for your UPSC exam, all those legal procedures, and how the legislative process works.
Okay, so we've got continued investigations even if a judge resigns, a more independent group to do the investigating, and we need to fix the Judges Inquiry Act. Anything else?
There's this idea that's becoming more popular about including more people in the impeachment process itself.
You mean more than just members of Parliament?
Right. Some people think it should include legal experts, representatives from bar associations, maybe even the public in some way. They say it would make the process more transparent and accountable.
Interesting. But wouldn't involving the public in something so sensitive make it more vulnerable to public opinion? Could that compromise the fairness of the whole thing?
That's a valid concern, and legal experts don't agree on this. It's tricky, you know. You want public scrutiny, but you also need to protect the integrity and fairness of the process. Figuring out how to do both, that's a big debate.
So there's no easy fix, huh? It's
Pretty much.
complicated, with good arguments on both sides.
Yeah.
But in the end, don't we want people to trust the judicial system?
Absolutely. And that's what makes this whole topic so important, not just for your UPSC exam, but for how our democracy works. We need a strong and independent judiciary, but it has to be accountable to the people. Finding that balance, that's the challenge.
Well said. So, we've talked about the Constitution, real-life cases, and even some ideas for fixing things. But there's one more piece of the puzzle.
Public awareness. Getting people involved. It's not just about laws, it's about everyone being committed to holding those in power accountable.
You know, that's a perfect segue into our next segment, where we'll look at how public pressure and activism can make a difference. Stay with us. We're back. And we've been talking about this whole idea of judicial accountability in India. It's not just some theory, it's a real issue. And it matters, you know, for our democracy.
Right, and if you're studying for the UPSC, this is where it gets real. You can memorize all the articles and cases you want, but to really ace that mains exam, you got to understand how this stuff actually works, the nuances.
Exactly. We've looked at the laws, we've talked about some crazy cases, even brainstormed some solutions. But there's one thing we haven't really talked about: the public.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the legal jargon and procedures, but at the end of the day, this isn't just about words on paper. It's about making sure the courts are fair, that they actually work for the people.
And that's where people like us come in, right? Public awareness.
100%. Ordinary citizens might not be able to impeach a judge or change the laws, but they have a voice. They can speak up, demand accountability, and push for real change.
Okay, but how? I mean, most people aren't legal experts. How can we actually make a difference?
It all starts with knowing what's going on. The more people understand how the courts work, the better they'll be at spotting problems and demanding solutions. Think about it. If you don't know the rules of the game, how can you argue with a bad call?
Good point. So education is key. People need to know their rights, how to file a complaint if a judge does something wrong, what the whole process is.
Exactly. And the media has a big role to play here. Journalists need to report on this stuff. They need to expose cases where the system failed, get people talking about these issues.
Shining a light on what's hidden, making sure these things don't get swept under the rug.
You got it. Remember those cases we talked about? Ramaswamy, Sen, Dinakaran? Those caused a public outcry because the media reported on them. That public pressure, people demanding answers, that's what forces the system to change.
So it's not just about knowing your own rights. It's about everyone being aware that judges aren't above the law, that they can be held accountable.
Exactly. And this is where groups like NGOs and legal advocacy groups are so important. They educate people, help them file complaints, and fight for reforms.
They're kind of like a bridge between the legal stuff and everyday people, right?
Yeah, exactly. They amplify the voices of the people who've been hurt, offer legal expertise, and help people navigate the system. And don't forget about social media. That's a whole new way for people to come together, raise awareness, and push for change.
Think about it. Online petitions, social media campaigns, all these platforms where people can share information and mobilize support. It's amazing.
It really changes things. Social media lets people bypass the traditional gatekeepers and talk directly to those in power. It puts pressure on lawmakers to actually do something, to make real reforms.
So it's not about waiting for the government to fix everything. It's about us, the citizens, taking charge, demanding better, and driving the change we want to see.
That's what democracy is all about. Active citizens, participation, everyone working together to uphold justice and fairness.
Well said. I think our listeners have a lot to think about after today's deep dive. Judicial accountability in India, it's a complex issue, that's for sure.
It is, and there are no easy answers. But understanding the problems and how we might fix them, that's a good start. And for our UPSC folks out there, this isn't just about passing an exam. It's about understanding what shakes our country and how you can help make it better.
It's about seeing the law not as some fixed set of rules, but as something that's alive, that changes, that reflects what we believe in as a society.
Right.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into judicial accountability in India. We hope you found it informative and, well, maybe even a little inspiring.
If you're preparing for the UPSC, keep digging into these issues. Think critically. Form your own opinions about how to improve the Indian judiciary. It matters.
And if you enjoyed this episode, do us a favor and share it with your friends, your family, anyone studying for the UPSC. Hit that like button, subscribe to The Deep Dive, and help us spread the word.
Thanks for listening.